What's going on, guys? We have got a rematch of potentially one of the greatest matches of all time. We're, of course, talking about Dave Chaffee and Vitaly Laletin, who will be throwing down at King of the Table 10 in only a week or so away. These guys, last time they faced in October 2022, was an absolute bloodbath. Quite literally a bloodbath. I had the honor of being the lead commentator for the match at King of the Table, and it was incredibly special. These guys absolutely left nothing to question. Vitaly Laletin went out in an ambulance. He was utterly exhausted. Dave Chaffee's blood and DNA was left everywhere over the table. It was one of the most exciting matches I've ever seen, let alone got to call, and I think it is forever down in the history books. Now, these two gentlemen are going at it once again. We need to see this one more time. Dave Chaffee, of course, in a position where he's on a bit of a bad run and he needs to get that redemptive arc going. And Vitaly Laletin looking very strong and impressive in recent times. He wants to, of course, redeem his loss last time to Dave Chaffee, because it was Dave who was victorious that night in October 2022 at King of the Table 5. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to do in today's video is we're going to go through this match. We're going to look at the technical options that are presented to both gentlemen, their vulnerabilities, their strengths, and we're going to give you an idea of where this match is going to go.
Holding center, breathing, waiting for the time to commit. He recommits.
Dave Chaffee takes the silver bullet, wins this match.
Dave, easy money. Chaffee takes the victory in the absolute match of the night. Look at this. Take a bow, both gentlemen, as he embraces his wife there. What a victory. Dave Chaffee coming through with endurance, heart, commitment. There's the celebration.
So it's the first time you ever gripped up Vitaly. Will we see a rematch?
I would love to pull Vitaly again. That's one of my most memorable matches I've ever had. It's a war. I was up 2-0. He came back 3-2, and I came back. Oh, what a match.
Okay, so in order to get into this match properly, I think it's important that we have a look at what they did last time. Now, at King of the Table 5, these guys really did have a truly amazing match. In the early rounds, it was Dave Chaffee who was seeming dominant. Once the match got strapped up, he was able to transition from strong side pressure, which would open up Vitaly Laletin, who would establish a defensive top roll and keep himself alive. But it was as soon as Dave Chaffee was able to transition with his shoulder behind to what at the time seemed like a newfound move, the flop press, it was too much for Vitaly Laletin. Vitaly Laletin then returned serve by getting 2 victories with a out-of-straps victory. At that point in the match, it was seeming that Dave Chaffee was looking tired. His hand was starting to be blown up, and he didn't have the ability out of straps to effectively slip. He started trying to flop slip, and Vitaly Laletin sensed that incredibly well. He cut him off at center with a little bit of low forward pressure incorporated into his top roll and was able to get a side pressure hit. Bang, done. He got one of the rounds. The next round, it was a messy round where Dave Chaffee was trying to slip, and all of a sudden it looked ugly, slips in a foul position, and it was 2-all. At that point in time, it looked like Vitaly Laletin was the man who had a better energy management. Dave was starting to struggle. He was starting to try to work out ways to get easy slips, and it didn't look good. Dave then manned up, got the slip, but it went to straps, and Vitaly Laletin had more side pressure than Dave Chaffee could deal with and was able to get a victory with a clean top roll. Yes, Dave did put up a fight, and it did take 3, 4, maybe 5 surges for Vitaly Laletin to actually get through. But at that stage, it really did look like Vitaly Laletin was going to run away with it. We then, in rounds 6 and ultimately 7, saw Dave Chaffee just start with the flop press. Now, he couldn't start with the flop press earlier in the matches because Vitaly Laletin's arm was still too fresh. But at this stage of the match, when fatigue had accumulated in the bicep of Vitaly Laletin, it gave room and opportunity for Dave Chaffee to just go straight for that flop press. Dave went straight for that flop press, got his shoulder behind. Vitaly put up some defensive stops and held it off for a while, but it was that second wave of recommitment from Dave Chaffee that really allowed him to get through. And of course, in the final round, it was much the same. It was a committed flop press. Nothing left in the tank for Vitaly Laletin. So this was a really interesting stylistic matchup, and what was most fascinating was the way that they actually managed their energy levels. It ebbed and flowed where we thought Vitaly We thought early days Dave was way ahead. Then the pendulum swung to Vitaly, and then it was an unexpected swing back. For most people in the room, it was an unexpected swing back to Dave Chaffee towards the end. Now, this energy management, I think, will be very present in their memories. This will be a big factor moving forward. Okay, so one thing is very interesting straight away. It's the fact that these guys have faced each other before and was such a knife-edge match. Now, for both of these guys, it's a very real thing. They remember the feeling, they remember the battle, and although it was some time ago, it is very easy to plan and it's very easy to think about the consequences of mistakes of last time and try to rectify them. You then go into this weird mindset where you think, okay, do I just keep it on a singular adjustment? Do I just make the adjustment that would have worked in that match? Or do I anticipate that my opponent also is aware that I'll probably make this adjustment and bring something different? Now, on the day of that match, the flop press was new for Dave Chaffee. He's had a year and a bit's time since that match to reinforce that strength. And it's fair to say that I believe he has. If we see training footage of Dave Chaffee, it looks as though he is preparing to go with that flop press once again, or at least he's expecting the match to go there in the later stages. Now, Vitaly Laletin equally, he is preparing, and you can see that he's doing things that make sense as well. He is using a lot more direct, straight side pressure with wrist flexion. That, of course, is something that he grips a little bit lower, has a little bit more inside pressure in his top roll, much like the rounds that he won where he was outside of straps and just got a great purchase and flash pin Dave. He is considering all the options of how to actually deny Dave from getting his shoulder behind him. He wants to keep Dave outside of his shoulder. And when you are a tall top roller, over-pronating is something that can be risky. Over-pronating allows the opportunity for your opponent to get in there. So it's no surprise we're seeing Vitaly Laletin train and try to awaken his side pressure with a slightly lower grip. Now, these two guys, coming in respect to the energy management, it's hard to know. Have any of them done more aerobic training? I haven't seen it. Have any of them done more endurance training? I don't know. These guys typically are still who they are, but they're making stylistic adjustments to this match. What happens after the go in the first rounds is very interesting. Okay, so let's look at Vitaly Laletin. Vitaly Laletin lost this match last time. He is the taller man quite clearly, standing at something like 6'7". He is the tallest arm wrestler in the professional arm wrestling world. And with that, he has the longest arm and an enormous hand. He's also got amazing grip strength. He's actually the world record holder on the dynamometer. I think at about 160 thereabouts kilos in squeezing pressure. So imagine an incredibly long arm, incredibly strong hand. Okay, he is someone who uses that height very well, and it's no surprise given he is so tall that he is an all-out top roller. Okay, it's very rare for us to see him hook. The only time that I can think of that in recollection is when he pulled someone like Krasimir Kostadinov, who he was just too strong for and was in another strength level. But when he is up against an opponent that is genuinely at his level in power and strength and threat on the table, we see him revert to his top roll. So it is almost certain that we know Vitaly Laletin will top roll. But Vitaly Laletin, coming off the back of the adjustments of last time, the memory of 2022 against Dave Chaffee, we can expect to see him do something slightly different to what he did last time. Last time, he went high, standard top roll, hits it, busts Dave's wrist back, goes sideways. Pretty basic formula. The vulnerabilities, as we've talked about, if we reflect on that last match, was once he became over-pronated, it allowed the opportunity for Dave Chaffee to get his shoulder behind and come forward. So in this time round, we're expecting, or I'm expecting, to see Vitaly Laletin not run as much as he used to, not go as high as he used to, because he doesn't want to end up over-pronated again. He wants to find that sweet spot. Now, there is a point where it's too far. If he goes too far down, there is a point where Dave Chaffee, his power is too strong and Vitaly Laletin's arm is too low and he can no longer crack the wrist of Dave. If he goes that low, it's a very bad mistake and Dave Chaffee will just take him sideways. Dave Chaffee with the shorter arm has more power when it's wrist on wrist. That's just the biomechanics, the physics of how these two match up. But there is a sweet spot somewhere between too low and too high that Vitaly Laletin is looking for. He will have an instinct of where it is based on his memory of the match of last time, and he will be aiming for that target. Imagine a spectrum of opportunity. If he goes too far this way, bad. If he goes too far this way, bad. But there is a middle ground in there that is exactly where Vitaly Laletin wants to be. So look for him to have a wrist that is not too high, not too low, somewhere sweet in the middle. Same with his arm angle. It will be not too high, not too low. And the feeling that he is searching for when he is in this setup is a feeling of the center of his palm being right on the midpoint of where the pivot of Dave Chaffee's wrist is. If the center of his palm is above Dave's hand, Dave will just flop under. If it's below the center mass of Dave's hand, Dave will be able to force a wrist flexion of his own and go sideways. It's a very small target sometimes when a man across the table from you is as strong as Dave Chaffee, but Vitaly Laletin will deadly be hunting that position. Now, a vulnerability for Vitaly Laletin in the process of hunting this is that it is a very small target that can be made smaller if Dave Chaffee does well in his setup. Now, typically speaking, like we said, overpronating is bad for Vitaly Laletin, and I'm sure he won't do that this time. Okay, but when he is looking for that perfect midpoint, one way in which Dave Chaffee can make it hard to identify that is to not completely load. If Dave Chaffee muscles up in all directions, that will allow Vitaly Laletin to get a good feel of exactly where it is. If Dave Chaffee creates a little pocket of almost reversing resistance in the setup, like keeps his fingers strong, keeps his rise up, which Dave will do, he always does, but doesn't impart and show side pressure, and subsequently doesn't allow Vitaly Laletin to understand whether he's actually going to crack Dave's wrist or not, then that becomes a very big risk for Vitaly Laletin. Vitaly Laletin, in order to combat this, is going to try to bait Dave Chaffee into showing him the value of his wrist. Dave Chaffee needs to be very careful in that respect. He doesn't want to give Vitaly Laletin that information, because that will enhance Vitaly's ability to take it after the go. So the vulnerability there, like I said, one more time, if Dave Chaffee doesn't show his integrity in wrist flexion before the go, then Vitaly Laletin is going to be hitting blind off the start. Okay, so now let's talk about Dave Chaffee. Last time, he had two main weapons that he used to accumulate against essentially a single weapon of Vitaly Laletin. And I truly think that was why he was able to overcome him. Those two weapons, of course, were a standard side pressure move from Dave Chaffee that we've seen all his career, but then he backed it up with that shoulder-committed flop press. Now, of course, having two sets of muscle groups to accumulate against one set of muscle groups being Vitaly Laletin's top roll serves him very well for the long run. Now, Dave Chaffee has not been an arm wrestler that we've talked about in the past as a technical arm wrestler. So when he brought out this flop press, it was a very interesting move. I think with the year and a half since this match, or a year and a bit since this match last time, he has had the opportunity to reinforce that. Now, Dave Chaffee's setup is a pretty classic standard sort of setup. He is someone who has a incredibly iron wrist. Now, when I say iron wrist, I'm not necessarily saying his wrist doesn't go back. I'm saying he has developed a very strong pronation through the wrist. Dave Chaffee isn't someone who needs to get cupped in order to be able to roll. He doesn't need to get cupped in order to have strong side pressure. Dave has amazing side pressure right from center just with a fist. Now, Dave, we can only assume, we don't know his dynamometer numbers compared to that of Vitaly Laletin. We know Vitaly Laletin is the world record holder in it, but you can just see by Dave Chaffee, if you've ever met him, the man is made from granite, and his hand feels like an absolute piece of concrete. So Dave Chaffee from center is a strong fist, he's a flat hand, and he pronates with that straight wrist. Now, as he pronates, it's a very awkward side pressure for most people, but Vitaly Laletin being as tall as he is, it's hard for Dave Chaffee to necessarily get purchase. Now, Dave Chaffee used that strength, that side pressure strength, twice last time to get 2 pins. In the first 2 rounds, it was essentially most of the work done with the side pressure. It created fatigue in the bicep of Vitaly Laletin and ultimately allowed him to stand up and finish with the flop press. Towards the end of the match, it was straight out flop press because the accumulated fatigue in Vitaly Laletin had become enough that the force between these two guys before the go had been reduced. So I think that Dave Chaffee is going to come into this match with essentially the same game plan. I mean, he did win last time, and although it was on a knife edge, he did look the better man across the average of the match. the rounds he lost, one was a casual slip in a losing position where he kind of got lazy. And the other one was a flash pin from Vitaly Laletin out of straps where, again, he kind of got lazy. I think if Dave Chaffee comes to this match, he will look to really up his focus, up his energy, and can make sure that he is strong right from the go. Now, what that looks like for a Dave Chaffee setup is very square shoulders. He's a neutral shoulder guy. He doesn't carve in one way or the other. He does go with predominantly side pressure and a bit of pronation. So he's not a defensive top roller. He's not a off-the-go hooker, or he's just going to have probably a 70%, 80% side pressure-based drive with strong-wristed, flat-wristed pronation. He always wants webbing height. He always wants depth. And against someone of Vitaly Laletin's caliber, he is going to want that as well. Keep in mind what we discussed before, that Vitaly may not go as high as he did last time. He may not want to end up overpronated. So if that's the case, Dave Chaffee will probably be quite happy in the early rounds because he gets to get more purchase in his hand and he gets to use that side pressure that he's got. So I actually expect Dave Chaffee, in the early rounds at least, to go with a very similar setup as he did last time. Standard, Dave Chaffee, rock solid strength. Now, the vulnerabilities for Dave this time around is that Vitaly Laletin knows it's coming. Vitaly Laletin this time gets to anticipate and expect the shoulder commitment in the later rounds. He gets to expect the shoulder commitment even in the early rounds as the side pressure runs out from Dave Chaffee. Now, because of this, Vitaly Laletin will be fresh the first time he sees Dave try to transition. Vitaly Laletin has an opportunity to throw a counterattack. He has an opportunity, and Dave needs to be very aware of the counterattacking ability that Vitaly Laletin will possess. One tool that is often used by great top rollers to prevent someone transitioning from side pressure into a flop press is a baited trap. Now, what I mean by a baited trap is when Vitaly Laletin initially gets into this match, let's say Dave Chaffee drives sideways, is that Vitaly Laletin will pretend to be more fatigued than he actually is. He will actually bait Dave Chaffee into a premature transition attempt. Now, that is done by Vitaly Laletin just seemingly showing no ability to hit. He can make it feel like he is redlining when he's not. Even though he is in some senses redlining, he will be holding in reserve a side pressure hit. Now, Dave Chaffee needs to really be aware of that. If Dave Chaffee does prematurely try to transition to a flop press, then Vitaly Laletin hits aggressively sideways with that in reserve strength that he wasn't showing Dave. That can be a very, very painful experience for Dave Chaffee. It can really open up his elbow, it can really blow away his hand, and it can make it even more difficult to transition to the full committed flop press later in the match. Dave Chaffee needs to be aware of this factor. His answer to that is to be careful, to be patient, and not to transition to that flop press until he is certain that the bicep strength of Vitaly Laletin is redlined and under full defense mode. Dave Chaffee and Vitaly Laletin last time gave us one of the matches that will be written down in the history books forever. It truly was amazing. Now, this next match has absolutely all the potential to go there exactly once again. Both of these gentlemen are strong enough to get the victory. It's very clear that that is the case. Regardless of form that they each bring in, we know that arm wrestling strength isn't a strength that just goes away. It's not a strength that can be built in huge amounts in a short period of time. And both of these gentlemen are truly at that upper echelon of the elite super heavyweights of the world. And we can be certain that this one will be a match that is down to the wire once again. Okay, this match is going to be great. Vitaly Laletin brings that top roll. He brings that big offensive weapon. He is the guy that has the very clear biomechanical lane. He doesn't have really any option to go deep into a hook. He doesn't really have a press option, and that's dictated by the fact that he is so tall. At 6'7", 6'8", whatever he is very, very tall, and it's subsequently an all or nothing move for him. He's forced into that situation where he has to use the top roll. The variations for him are very subtle. The variations for him are just quarter turn of the wrist into supination. It's not some big shoulder committed drive. It's going to be very, very subtle variations of his top roll. Dave Chaffee, on the other hand, he is the shorter man. He's the more kind of robust, sort of bulky, he looks like he's made of granite, to use the same expression as earlier. He's someone that does have the technical options. Now, even though he is not a technical style arm wrestler, we know that he has multiple lanes he can use. The top roll, the side pressure. Heaven forbid if it end up in a hook hit, he'd be very happy, I'm sure, but it's not going to go there. But he does have that flop press as well. So Dave, for him, it's management of all those tasks. It's management of energy, and it's management of timings of when to make those moves. He needs to know that Vitaly Laletin's top roll's too good, that Vitaly Laletin's ace is going to be far too much if he lets Vitaly Laletin hit it. So it's going to come down to the wire. Energy management against execution, against will to win. Last time, this one set itself as one of the all-time greatest matches. I hope this one supersedes that and we get an even better one once again. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in. Please let me know what you think about the match. Please subscribe, and we'll keep this one going.